Okay, I've went over how I planned it, and so now it's time to put the plan into action and show you how it went. Elite 4 starts off with Sydney, who fields a Dark-type team with a Sandstorm twist. His lead Tyranitar is probably looking to set up Stealth Rocks, but we'll never find out. My strategy is to beat Sydney at his own game by leading with Sand Rush Excadrill, which will outspeed his entire team. Life Orb Earthquake will guarantee kills on most of them. Tyranitar going down will bait one of three: Greninja for a Hydro Pump, Absol for close combat, both of which will get OHKO'd by Life Orb Earthquake, or Cacturne can come in for close combat. It holds a Focus Sash, so even with Life Orb, Excadrill can't OHKO. I honestly have no clue how the Switch AI works, because if I were Sydney, I'd send out Cacturne first. But he lined up Greninja and Absol for me, so this is perfect. When Cacturne comes in, I pivot over to Whimsicott to tank close combat. Whimsicott is holding a Rocky Helmet, and it helps me break the Sash. At this point, I could switch back to Excadrill, but Whimsicott can take the kill by herself anyways, so why not? Initially, I thought that because Whimsicott will only die to 2 high roll crits in a row, I was pretty safe. But this is actually a risky call because when Muck comes in, Whimsicott will be low enough to bait a random move. There is a chance Excadrill switches in on a crit and dies, or Fire and Ice Punch leaving a status. I didn't get punished, and Earthquake takes another kill, and in comes Mandibuzz. Mandibuzz is more of a nuisance than a threat. It looks like the strat is to Toxic Stall you to death, and use Foul Play on hard-hitting physical attackers. The worst case scenario for me is this turns into a 1v6 War of Attrition, but thankfully Ninetale just takes it out in 2 Moonblasts. Phoebe next. The game plan is to bait Chandelure into locking Fire Blast or Shadow Ball. I'll switch in Ninetales or Banette, who is immune to those moves respectively, and this should cause the AI to switch out, giving me the initiative against whoever is switching in. The first order of business is her lead Mismagius. It gets nuked by Scarfed Excadrill, and that actually conveniently switches in Chandelure on a Fire Blast, targeting Excadrill's Steel type. And sure enough, it switches into Golurk, and it gets nailed by the Will-O-Wisp on the switch. I switch to Rotom on the Earthquake, then to Banette on the Drain Punch, and Banette takes the kill with a 2-turn Phantom Force. Chandelure conveniently switches back in again, and we can repeat the strategy. Ninetales comes in on the Fire Blast, but this time instead of clicking Will-O-Wisp, I just decide to nuke whoever is switching in with a Flash Fire boosted Flamethrower. Dusknoir is slow, and in theory I could have taken it out with another Flamethrower, but in the planning phase I didn't see that line. In fact, looking at the calcs now, I could have probably given Ninetales Life Orb, and with Flash Fire I can pretty much sweep the rest of her squad except for Chandelure. But I played it safe and performed the same pivots: Rotom on EQ, Banette on Shadow Punch, KO with Knockoff. We are now repeating the cycle for the 3rd time, with Banette switching in and immediately getting tagged by Will-O-Wisp. It doesn't see any moves that kill, so the AI decides to set up Cotton Guard instead. It doesn't matter at all because Ninetales is about to hit special defense. It tries to retaliate with Stab Return, but it does no damage because of the burn, and Ninetales comfortably takes the kill with 2/3 HP remaining. So Chandelure comes back in for I don't know the how manyth time, and this time, since it's switching into Ninetales, it clicks Shadow Ball. I pivot to my own Banette for the immunity and blast Aegislash in the back with Phantom Force. Easy. And finally, Chandelure comes in for the final struggle. Literally. Struggle is a typeless move and can actually crit, so to play it safe, I switch over to Excadrill and put it out finally. My strategy for Glacia is not as bulletproof. To recap, Excadrill can take out half her squad easily if I can switch her in safely with the snow turned off. So this means Ninetales will need to counterset the sun and OHKO Abomasnow to guarantee there is no chance of the Snow or Aurora Veil being set up. Even with an Assault Vest, Ninetales gets chunked quite hard, but otherwise completely safe even with crit. Dodging the crit also means I can tank a few more special moves later on in the fight. With Abomasnow down and Ninetales chunked, this will switch in either Mamoswine or Glalie. Mamoswine is tanky and requires some intricate pivoting if I want to get Excadrill in, because it's a bit hard to guarantee it'll click an ice move. If I get it wrong and Excadrill switches in on an Earthquake or Superpower, that's most likely an OHKO. To be safe, I'll nail it with Will-O-Wisp to reduce its Fizz moves, and pivot to Scrafty for Intimidate. I can fake out Protect to get some extra ticks of burn, and you know what? At this point, I make the executive decision to just stall Mamoswine out with Protect and Resistance, and then take it out with a Brick Break from Scrafty when it's low enough. Glaceon comes in and I'm steering a little bit here. Because Ninetales dodged the crit earlier, I can safely switch her in on any move. Blizzard misses, but my Flamethrower also misses a range to kill. Getting hit by a Surf here looks real scary, but I'm relatively safe actually, due to the Sun weakening water moves. Glalie switches in and Mega Evolves. It actually gets completely walled by Scrafty due to Intimidate, and even Refrigerate Double Edge does pitiful damage, and it just goes down to a Brick Break. When I planned this fight, I didn't expect Scrafty to click anything besides Fake Out and Protect, let alone taking 2 kills. What a champ. Frostlass switches in and I can finally pivot to Excadrill, who can comfortably tank anything and return KO. Walrein is just here to be annoying, so we can skip over this. Now, let's talk about Drake. Before I added Whimsicott, this was the trickiest fight to plan around. I had some convoluted, risky, crazy thing going on with Rotom, but now that I have Whimsicott in the lineup, this was the freest fight. The win conditions are as follows. I need to set up the Sun, switch Whimsicott in on a Dragon move, Encore Lock it, click Growth once, and then sweep. In this case, Ninetales sets up the Sun, then immediately pivots to Excadrill on an Immune Sludge Wave. Dragalge gets sent to the Abyss by an Earthquake, and Kommo-o steps up for close combat. That whiffs into Banette, baiting it into Outrage, and then that's checkmate. Whimsicott outspeeds Drake's entire team due to Chlorophyll, locks Kommo-o into Outrage with Encore, sets up one Sun boosted Growth, and it's over. Everything will die to Moonblast except Naganadel. I taught Whimsicott Psychic just for that, and it didn't even end up needing it anyways. Finally, it's Wallace time. I'll disclaimer this now. The fight did not go as planned, however I managed to steer my way to the last Mon, but I lost Scrafty due to a brain fart and I had to restart. I'm running it back with the same failed strategy, as I was decently confident I'd pull it off if I didn't have a lapse in judgment. At a high level, the plan was similar to Drake. I get Whimsicott in with a Sun setup, set up Growth, and sweep. Whimsicott isn't quite hitting the range on a couple of kills, so I also want to set up Stealth Rocks. Wailord is another one of those Choice Scarf weather setters, so Ninetales will win the weather war regardless. The next part of the plan is extremely stupid, but I couldn't think of a better way of doing this. So Wailord locks in an EQ against Ninetales, and I need to switch in Excadrill to set up rocks. With a Shuka Berry to soften the first EQ, Excadrill will live any 2 rolls of EQ as long as neither of them crits. If it does, it's over. I didn't want to put Air Balloon on Excadrill and encourage a switch out, so I need Wailord to actually do damage here. So things go relatively according to plan and I safely-ish get Whimsicott in. But Wailord switches out anyways, which torpedoes my entire plan. I guess if you do below a certain threshold of damage, you'll still want to switch? I don't know. Anyways, Vikavolt comes in, and this is the Pokemon I set up the Stealth Rocks for. Whimsicott destroys it with a +2 Moonblast, and I breathe a sigh of relief because Vikavolt was the mon that was hardest to plan for. But now Wailord switches back in, and I lose my Chlorophyll speed buff. Wailord sees a killing roll with Ice Beam, so this lets me switch Ninetales back in quite safely. In my first attempt, at this point I decided to just try and blast the Wailord with Sunny Beam to get started on killing it. Instead, Whiscash comes in and takes a bullet for Wailord. No complaints about the outcome, so I repeat the same action for this attempt. I'm frankly quite unsure why Latios is switching in next. Its highest damaging move is Psyshock, which Scrafty is immune to. On Scrafty, the highest damaging move is Draco Meteor, so I switch in Whimsicott. This is like that Drake pivot sequence all over again. But Wailord switches in before I can nuke Latios, so we have to go through the entire pivot song and dance once again. In the second loop, I decide to Will-O-Wisp into the Latios switch in anyways. This way, by the time we pivot back to Whimsicott, it'll be in range to die to a non-boosted Moonblast. For this instance of the Wailord pivot, I expect Ludicolo to be switching in. So rather than firing a move into the pivot, I just hard switch to Rotom, who can take the kill 1v1 very comfortably with Freeze Dry. I gave Rotom an Assault Vest, so even if Ludicolo manages to set up Quiver Dance once, I'm completely safe to any rolls of crit. So we do the Wailord pivot thing again, and the only thing it can pivot to is Milotic, which is actually the biggest problem on Wallace's team. In my prep, I completely overlooked Mega Milotic and its ability Prism Scales, which halves all damage on special moves. I have no planned answers to this, especially since by setting up Calm Mind, it also shuts down Whimsicott's damage. The best I can do is Will-O-Wisp, lock in Calm Mind with Encore, and then switch to Excadrill and Pray. I'm also beating myself up a little bit here, because at some point I taught Ninetales Solar Beam over Encore. If I hadn't, I could have saved a turn switching over to Whimsicott to Encore. So this comes down to RNG of how many turns of Encore I can get. Excadrill can outspeed, but it will need 2 Earthquakes to kill at minimum. Or Wallace could switch back into Wailord, negating all the Calm Minds, which is literally the bailout of the century. Wailord comes back into an Earthquake that finally puts it down, and I bring Ninetales in to set the sun, reducing Scald damage. Quick pivot to Whimsicott to get another tick of burn, then to Rotom where I can protect for an... God damn it. Okay, whatever. We risk crit, but we send it. Overall, the Elite Four went okay. Sydney, Phoebe, and Drake went exactly as planned, and Glacia was a little bumpy, and I noticed I got the calcs wrong here and there in the planning stage. However, the line I ended up taking was relatively riskless. Wallace was a mess, and even though I got through it on some crazy scuffed improvised strategy, everything hinged on getting good Encore RNG, and I honestly got bailed out by the switch as well, negating that +6 Mega Milo. If I had to redraw that line, I wonder if I could have done something like Banette Curse Install or Skill Swap Prism Scales Out or something. Regardless, we take those and we move on.